Hello, in the first lecture of my course about King's Indian Defense. We will start in the first chapter with some illustrative games in the King's Indian. So we will see some typical motifs and some best games for black. So I think this is something good to see because after seeing some best games, you have bigger chance to be more excited about this opening. Okay, so let's start with the first game. The first game will be between Wesley and Hikaru Nakamura, played in 2015 in Slinkefield Cup. So absolutely two top grandmasters. Of course, this is the King's Indian. This is the starting position for King's Indian. And Hikaru went in this game for the main line, which is the move knight c6, d5, knight e7, and knight e1. This is very topical line. I played a couple of games by white in this variation, and I think that this is very interesting to play. Of course, the move knight d7 is one of the options. You can also play knight e8, knight d7. This is just a matter of taste. F3, F5, and bishop e3. This is definitely some good diagonal. The diagonal g1, a7 for the dark squared bishop in white's camp. So this is some good maneuver for white. But on the other hand, of course, it's a little bit slow. g5, knight d3. Some other big main lines are the moves a4 and rook c1. In the game it was played knight d3. I'm not going to focus on some theoretical part of these games because I want to show you just some motifs which occurred in this game. Knight g6 and c5. Of course, this is definitely typical game in the King's Indian. In the King's Indian, mainly black is trying to mate the white's king, and white is seeking some counterplay on the queen side. So it's obvious that white is starting some action on the queen side. Knight f6, and of course, black is focusing on the king side. Rook c1, rook f7. This is just the good move, protecting the c7 square and preparing some maneuver with the bishop. King h1. Of course, white is also making some prophylaxis. h5 and cd6, cd6. Finally, some more forced action on the queen side. Some other line possible here was, for example, the move queen b3. Here after g4, knight b5, g3, or because right now a6 doesn't work thanks to the move knight c7, and after rook c7, bishop b6. This is just some much better position for white because he is ready to invade on the queen side, and black is far away from any attack on the king side. So if not a6 and then g3, then bishop a7, bishop f8. Everything is definitely forced here. Rook c2, bishop d7. Right now there was a threat of taking the piece after taking on b5 and on a7. gh2, bishop f2, f2, h4, rook fc1, h3. Here, as you can see, the black's attack is very dangerous. g3, fg3, bishop g3, bishop b5, queen b5, and bishop h6. This is some rare picture because, as I said in the introduction, you can give up your white squared bishop in only very rare occasions, and this is right now the good occasion because the attack on the king side is very smooth and very dangerous. But generally speaking, a light squared bishop in the King's Indian is for black very important piece. Okay, let's go back to the game. a6, knight a3. This is some, at that time it was some new move. Let's have a look at the move knight a7. Then bishop d7. As you can see, it's absolutely essential to not give up this bishop. queen b3, g4, queen b6, queen b6, bishop b6. Despite exchanging the queens, still white has some problems because, as you can see, his knight on a7 is out of play. h4, knight f2, h3. Of course, black has to seek for some play on the king side. And after knight h4, this position is quite unclear. I think that it's double-edged. Okay, in the game it was tried something else, knight a3 and b5. Very good move, just to restrict the very important knight on a3, because the square on c4 is no longer possible. But of course, rook c6, g4. Nakamura is not hesitating and is just starting some attack on the king side. Queen c2, queen f8. Let's have a look at some other typical move in the King's Indian. This is move g3. After bishop b6, hg3 wasn't the best idea because the white's king position is becoming a little bit too windy. And after knight h5, there is a big initiative. So after g3, it would be better to play the move bishop b6. And after queen f8, h3, knight h4. Of course, there are also some motives with sacrificing on g2 and even on h3. Rook c1, bishop d7, bishop f1. This position is, I think, quite good for white because the attack of black is a little bit stuck. So this is something what white wants to achieve. So I think that the move g3 was a little bit premature. I think that the move queen f8 is a little bit even better. Rook c1, bishop d7, rook c7. This is some misplay definitely. It was essential just to play the move knight b4 because, of course, black doesn't want to give up his light squared bishop even for the rook. After bishop c6, dc6, there will be plenty of play. But again, I think that white's chances can be a little bit more preferable because his play is just much easier. So the move rook c7 is definitely a mistake. Bishop h6 with a threat of playing g3. So bishop e1 and h4. As you can see, the attack is becoming very dangerous. fg4. At that moment, Wesley saw a little bit panic. After the move bishop b4, h3, gh3, still there will be a plenty of play. The move fg4 only helps black. f3, gf3, knight e4. Brilliant play from Nakamura. I think that this is one of his best games in his whole career. Rook d1. Again, Wesley saw is helping his opponent. Let's check some variations because they are really interesting. For example, if f e4, then rook f1, king g2, bishop e3, stunning move. And here, after h3, black is of course winning. So of course, white cannot take on e4. What about the move rook d7? Then comes rook e3, bishop f3, queen f3, queen g2, queen d3, rook d1, and here, stunning move again, bishop d2, simply just winning because there are too many threats. For example, like the move h3, and everything is just simply collapsing. So very impressive position from black, or even knight f4, of course. Here, maybe not even h3, but even this move. So again, this doesn't work. If, for example, knight f2, then of course it's not the end immediately, but of course there is some material advantage for black, and I think that they wouldn't have any bigger problems to just win this game. But maybe this was the best chance. Wesley saw again misplayed, and here it comes the move rook f3. Rook d7. Taking this bishop doesn't help nothing, because when it comes again this motive. Bishop g3, of course, everything is just losing, but Wesley so just allowed Hikaru Nakamura to end this game in a brilliant style. King h3, queen h6, g5. Of course, still black has to be precise. King g4, knight h f3, with a threat of mating on h3. Knight f2, queen h4. Of course, the king is absolutely lost. And here knight e4, king g6, queen g5. I must say that this is absolutely a brilliant play, a brilliant place for mating the white's king, of course, because it's not quite often to mate your opponent on g6 when you are playing with black pieces. So I think that this is a very, very good game from Hikaru Nakamura, and I think it's absolutely in the spirit of King's Indian Defense. Okay, let's move on to the next game. Maybe not this game, but let's start with the game Karpov-Kasparov played way back in 1993 in Linares. Of course, this was the times when Karpov and Kasparov were at his best. They were absolutely dominating the world chess. Knight bd7, rook d1. Of course, there are plenty of of other variations, but we are not going to focus on them. d5. This is some misplay from Anatoly Karpov. Some theory is, for example, here the move d5, and after c5, we reach a typical King's Indian defense position. Knight e5, b3, and b5, played in the dynamic fashion, just from which Kasparov is best known. Of course, queen d6 would result in some worse endgame, so Karpov is not interesting to go for this. Queen d6, knight fd7, f4. Maybe a better chance was to play queen d2. And here, before, again, very nice play from Garry Kasparov. What about the move queen b4? Because it looks obvious. When it comes c5, bishop c5, and knight c5. Tactics works perfectly for black. Of course, rook d8 would result with the move knight d3, and after queen c5, knight d3, it's absolutely lost position and absolutely hopeless position for white. So in the game it was played the move knight b1, of course fe5, then bc3, and if knight a4, then rook a4. Again, some dynamic play from Garry Kasparov. I'm absolutely sure that he would find all of these variations, because this position is absolutely in his taste. Knight b1, knight g4, bishop d4. If bishop g1, then after, of course, rook a2, h3, queen h4, g3. Still, this position is collapsing again. And this is definitely not white, not what white wants to achieve after the opening. In the game, it was the move bishop d4, bishop d4, queen d4. If knight d4, then rook a2, quite similar to the game. Rook a2, h3, d5, queen g1. If queen d3, then bishop a6. And after queen d7, of course, queen f3 would be the best chance. But still, the position of white would be very, very bad, because right now there is even the material balance. So, and of course, the position is much better for black. After queen d7, queen h4, g3, again this motif, after which black is simply winning. Okay, in the game it was the move queen g1. Of course, this is not the ideal placement for white's queen, but there is nothing more to add, because white is simply just collapsing here. Knight gf6, e5, knight e4. Again, right now there is even material balance, and the position is very bad for white. h4, c4. Again, with in Kasparov's style, very dynamic play. Knight c1 was played in the game, which allows very nice ending. Let's have a look at some other lines. If, for example, bc4, then queen a5, queen e3, b3, knight ec3, and everything is the position of whites is absolutely tangled, and there's no hope for them. And if queen e3, then c3, queen e4, and c2, the small pawn which took some trip from the square c6 is just winning the game for black. Rook d2, queens, and knight e5. Again, the position absolutely collapses. Okay, so let's go back to the game. We move rook knight c1. c3. An interesting move, probably not the only one which wins the position, but definitely the most brilliant. Knight a2, c2, queen d4. Maybe after rook c1 still there would be some chances for white. But after knight e5, of course this is not easy to play such move, but I'm pretty sure that Kasparov would find this move. After rook c2, bishop g4, again there is material balance and absolutely lost position. So, but still maybe it was something better to try, because queen d4 is losing on the spot. cd1, king d1, knight dc5, takes, king c2, and knight f2 with absolutely zero chances of holding this position. If king e1, then bishop g4 with a threat of mating his opponent. Just look at white's and black's knight here. Black's knight are very active and is dominating the position. On the other hand, white's knights are on b1 and on a2, absolutely out of play. It's quite a seldom seen picture when Karpov's pieces are standing that bad. And of course, this would change nothing. So, very brilliant play from Garry Kasparov. He just absolutely destroyed his famous opponent. And I think that I would love to play such a game in King's India. The third game I want to show you is between Jan Gustafsson and Vladimir Kramnik, played in 2012. Let's have a look at it. Castles, bishop e2, e5, bishop e3, d6, castles, e d4, knight d4, rook e8, f3, and d5. This is quite a popular variation. C d5, knight d5, knight d5, c d5, rook c1. And here quite an interesting move, a5. There are plenty of possibilities to play something else. For example, if d4, then fe4, bishop d4, rook c6, and this is quite a typical King's Indian endgame, in which white, thanks to his bishop pair, has some edge. So this is definitely not what Kramnik wants to have after the opening. So he played the move a5. Quite an interesting motive. The idea behind this is just to play on queen b3 the move a4, which was played in the game. After queen a3, then d4, rook cd1, the position would be complicated. But Jan Gustafsson just took on d5. Queen d5, e d5, and a3. Maybe you think that Vladimir Kramnik is not the type of player who is playing dynamic, but in this game he showed that this is not true. b3. If ba3, then bishop d7, knight c2, and quite similar to the game. black would have some good initiative. So Gustafsson played the move b3 and knight c6. Quite nice tactics. Knight c2 and of course rook e3. Just going for some initiative, some positional play against the a pawn. Rook c4. Of course, this type of position is not easy to handle as white, because of course after opening you are the side who is in defense, but still it was essential to play the move rook c7. After bishop d4, rook e7, bishop f5, rook d1, bishop c5, d6, knight a2. Still, this position is far from over. And this is, of course, what Jan Gustafsson should have played in this position. Rook c4 is probably a little bit too passive. Still, this plan is absolutely wrong, because rook a4 right now is just losing. After knight c2, knight c3, bishop d3, a2. Of course, this position is so unpleasant, but still, it's not easy to end this game, because the a1 square is just well defended by the knight from c2 and the rook from f1. So this is what white should have gone for, but he played very bad move, which is move rook a4. The exchanges of rooks doesn't help at all, because after bishop d4, white has big problems with his knight. King f2. This is probably the last mistake in the game. After bishop c4, bishop e3, king h1, knight b4, rook a1, bishop c5. At least white would took this annoying pawn on e3, but of course this position should be just a matter of technique, but still black would have to play a couple of moves. King f2 is just something which gives up the position absolutely. Rook d1 wouldn't help at all, because black could play even the move bishop a7. And bishop c4, knight c2, of course with some with absolutely one position. So rook c1 and a2. Kramnik is just pushing his pawn. Rook c8, king g7, rook c1, and black is in no hurry, just takes the pawn. Rook d1, knight e3, and this is just a good moment just to resign, because the pawn queens and black is ending up with a piece up. So this is how you outplay your opponent, who is rated 2600. Of course, it's not that easy, but I think that idea which was created by Vladimir Kramnik connected with push of the pawn was very interesting. Definitely this guarantees much more play than variations like d4 or even the move knight c6, because in that type of position it's white who has active play, and with the move a5 Kramnik forced his opponent to play with some forced his opponent to go for some defense. So very smart play from Vladimir Kramnik, and of course the rest of the game was also brilliantly played by him. Very interesting idea, I think. Okay, so the last game for today would be between Boris Gelfand and Garry Kasparov, played in Linares way back in 1992. Let's have a look at this game. Of course, this is the main variation of King's Indian, and the move c6, Queen d2, and e d4. I think that Garry Kasparov has some special likings for this type of structure. Rook e8, f3, and d5, immediately seeking for some active counterplay. cd5 castles, knight c6, c5, and the move rook e3. I played this position as white in some blitz game, and I was really surprised that you can play in that manner. And I have to admit that I didn't know this game, which was played by Garry Kasparov. This was his idea, and I investigated a little bit this variation, and it's fully playable for black and very interesting. Queen f3, queen e3, queen f8, knight c b5. After the move knight c6, bc6, king h1, rook b8, there's a very active position for black, and he definitely has some good compensation for missing exchange. So Boris Gelfand went for some other idea, which is move knight c b5, queen c5, rook a c1, queen b6, queen f2, and bishop d7. Black is just simply just developing his rook fd1. If here knight b3, then bishop h6 with some very active play. Rook c3 just to defend against the move bishop e3. Rook e8. Even exchanging of the queens doesn't help white. Still, black has very active position because all of his pieces are very active. So rook f d1, rook e8, bishop f1, bishop h6, rook c3, and knight b4. And here, after knight c2, the position of black is just much better. Let's have a look at some other line. For example, if a3, then knight a2, rook b3, a6, knight c3. As you can see, this rook was definitely misplaced, and black is regaining the queen with with a pawn up and much better prospects in the endgame. So knight c2, queen f2, king f2, knight c2, rook c2, bishop e3, king e1, bishop f4. Of course, Garry Kasparov is not taking the draw because his position is much more active. What is the result after the opening? Of course, white has the exchange up, but for the two pawns, and the bishop pair of black is very active. So this is why the position of black is much better. Rook d8, king d1, bishop f4, knight d4, a6, bishop d3, and h5. Of course, right now Kasparov doesn't have to hurry. Rook c3, h4, bishop c2, bishop g3, rook e2, king g7, just slowly improving his position. Rook b3, rook b8, because the pawn on b7 was hanging. Rook d2, and b5. Again, Kasparov can push a little bit. Rook a3, rook b6, and b4. Gelfand is trying to do something, but still his position is very bad, and creating more weaknesses here on before doesn't change much, but because he just needs to do something. Bishop d6, rook b3, knight ah5, just going with knight for some more active position. Knight e2, and bishop e6, defending the pawn on d5. a3, g5, pushing some pawns on the king side. Knight d4, king f6. The exchanging of one of the bishops doesn't help much, because the character of play doesn't change much. Rook c3, 4, rook c8. Finally, white achieved at least a little bit of activity, but black achieved even more activity. King e2, bishop f4, rook dc2, knight e3, king f2. Finally, Gelfand is even giving up his exchange. Let's have a look at, for example, rook to c6, then rook c6, rook c6, taking on g2, king f2, and this position is hopeless because the pawn is just promoting. So this is why Gelfand chose to defend his important pawn. Bishop g3, king g1, and taking on c2. Still, maybe there are a little bit of chances for white because there is an opposite colored bishops. But of course, this is just an illusion of holding this position. King g5, some breakthrough on the king side. If rook e2, then rook c6, and of course it doesn't change much. So king f1, e5, king e2, king g4, rook c8, and rook f6, just going for the g2 pawn. Bishop e4, rook f2, king d3, bishop f4, rook g8, king h5, bishop d5. Still, there some technique is required in that type of position. Bishop g5, king e4, rook g2. At least white achieves some activity, but in that position Boris Gelfand just resigned because he doesn't want to continue the fight. I can understand him because it's not nice to play that type of position, and he just didn't want to continue the fight. So very impressive play from Garry Kasparov. Again, as you can see, the King's Indian defense was the opening which suits Garry Kasparov perfectly. This is one of his pet openings because he can easily seek some active play, especially like in this game with idea of exchanging of sacrificing the exchange on e3 and queen f8. At first look, it may looks like that white is better, but of course it's not true because black is obtaining a tremendous initiative. Okay, so this was the first lecture of my King's Indian course. In next chapters, of course, we are going to see some theory of this dynamic opening. And I think that that these variations will be just good enough for you, even if you are not a sharp player. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.